perfection. How do we get a perfect college football season? I was thinking about this on my long, arduous drive from Columbus, Georgia, back to Nashville, Tennessee last night, and I was asking myself, what do I think a perfect season is? Some people go back to 2007, and they think that's the perfect season, where everyone's got like 2 losses, and we've got South Florida randomly in the top 5. The number 2 team loses 7 of the last 9 weeks of the regular season. A lot of you like that. It turns out a lot of you like chaos. And I asked you guys earlier today on Twitter, I said, hey, what would make the perfect season for you? I think this is a really fun exercise. Early season upsets, I think, are always pivotal. If we're going to have a perfect season this fall, if we're going to have 2023 start molding itself into a perfect season, early season upsets are so important for one obvious reason. They just blow the sport up. They take those preview magazines and you might as well chuck them in the fireplace, even though it's still 70 degrees outside. That's how early in the season it is. And it's memorable. I mean, everyone knows where they were, if you were of age, when you saw App State take down Michigan. Yeah, that speaks for itself, though. And it's memorable, and everyone has it burned in their mind forever. However, if it happens early in the season, you get all the pluses of the upset, but the team that got upset's not out of it. So you could have Duke beat Clemson to start the year. It's a scenario we may actually entertain later in the show, mind you. So Duke celebrates, and all 37 people at the game there in Durham, they run on the field. They have to run over a track to get on the field because Duke has a track around their field. I bash because I care, guys. But Clemson gets to lick their wounds, go back in the locker room and say, okay, well, net result is we got 1 loss. We've got 11 games to go. We got FSU coming in 3 weeks. We got to get right. We have 0 margin for error, but we're still alive. That's great. Like, no one's done in week 1. And yet you could have just chaos all over the place. So early season upsets, I think that's important. You've got the chaos B scenario, which is you have no elite teams out there. And that just means a year like 07, where there's stuff happening every single week. But then you also could have the chaos A scenario, and we've seen this one a time or two, where you do have some elite teams emerge, and they sort of distance themselves from the pack, and they just look back at the rest of the field behind them in their dust, and there's a bunch of chaos behind them, but we all know, yeah, there's chaos in the regular season, but we're going to get to the finish line, and we know who's going to be on that field in January, I think in Houston this year. We know who's going to be on that field in Houston in January. So if you want chaos, I say you ascribe to chaos B scenario. And if you didn't know what that was before tonight, that's the one where you don't really have teams that fully separate themselves from the pack. I think that makes for the most entertaining season because it keeps everyone guessing. Clear contenders emerging in each conference is vital to have the perfect college football season. We cannot just have good teams in the Big Ten and the SEC. You got to have a Florida State follow through on that preseason promise, or a Clemson, maybe a Miami or North Carolina breakthrough. Feel free to join the party again. Anybody in the state of Virginia. But you also got to go out west. And aside from just having really good quarterback play, you got to have one of those teams figured out defensively. And you got to have them come out of there unscathed instead of going into the Pac-12 championship game with a bunch of losses because everyone's beating each other up. So Oregon, do it. Or Michael Penix in Washington, do it. Hey, maybe Southern Cal holds people under 30 points per game for once in Lincoln Riley's career. Do it. I don't care who it is. Just do it. Get me someone from West Coast. And then in the Big 12, it can be Texas. It doesn't really matter because even though Texas is favored every year, they've yet to actually follow through on any of that promise. So it could be Texas. It could be OU. Maybe it's TCU again. Maybe it's K-State. Maybe it's Texas Tech. Don't really care who it is. I just need viable contenders from every conference. And then, if you really want to go from 9.5 to 10 on the perfection scale, have Notre Dame in there, and then get me like a Cincinnati level G5 team. Since he's not in the G5 anymore, but you remember a couple of years ago, they were good enough where even I, Mr. Anti-G5 when it comes to the playoff, Mr. Never Let One of Them In, had to bend and say, I think Cincinnati belongs in the playoff. So if you get a solid, like Tulane, for example, if you get a solid G5 tier candidate that looks like they could go against the big boys, and Tulane welcomes Ole Miss in early in the season down in New Orleans, so we'll see what they look like. That would be good. I'd love nothing more than for us to enter November with all the conference championship pictures still totally up for grabs. You got like a 4 or 5-way sprint to the finish for the Heisman Trophy race, multiple positions. We got a defensive player like Dallas Turner at Alabama is all of a sudden in it. We got maybe an LSU defender Maybe Harold Perkins down there is in it. We've got that going on. And also, because all of that's muddy, the college football playoff picture's muddy, which also leads me to another point of perfection I would love baked into any kind of season that's ideal for me, and that is no one's talking about the playoff until we get to November. What a day that would be. Well, you don't have to imagine it, kids. It used to happen all the time, and it could be that way again in our perfect world, of course. I was thinking about something else, though. Maybe your mind doesn't go here. Some of you don't care about this. Some of you do care about it, but you feel the opposite that I do. Sometimes you got to get lucky with weather to have the perfect season. And if you grew up in the South, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you don't get that first blast type cold front until early October. And you just swelter in September. But there are seasons where maybe climatologically things shift. You want to talk about Pacific and Atlantic oscillation patterns on the show tonight? We can do that. Nope, losing viewers already? Okay, well, what I'm saying is sometimes that early season cold front comes through. And you get dew points in the upper 50s. It's not supposed to happen that early in the year. But if we can get that, imagine Texas comes into Alabama in week 2 in Tuscaloosa, and instead of 92 degrees with 71% humidity or 71% dew points at kickoff, maybe it's 79 degrees with 58 degree dew points at kickoff. And it's just crisp, and it's the real autumn feel as much as you can feel like autumn in the South in September. Doesn't have to be perfect weather every week. I would love to get a couple of snowy games in the Big Ten. If you gave me one hurricane-ish game per year, not asking too much, just a little NC State Notre Dame action from a few years ago, sideways rain, just for the thrill of it. I hate if my team has to play in it, but just for the novelty aspect of seeing players play in a pond with grass at the bottom of it, that's a little fun for me. But really, it all circles back to what I just said a second ago. What does November mean? That's any kind of perfect college football season to me. What does November mean? Have we been able to dodge the fall wedding landmine? Are we looking at a bunch of games played on grass? This is out of our control. That's just a personal thing with me. Hate the field turf. Cannot stand it. Big noon kickoff. Have we learned to embrace it? Do we understand that God's light is the best light for some of these games? They don't all have to kick off at 8 p.m. It's okay. It's okay to embrace a noon kickoff every now and then. I know at Penn State, you guys are mad that Fox strips away some of your whiteout possibilities. I get it. Look at me. I get it all too well. But by and large, just overarching for the entire sport, big noon kickoff, not the worst thing in the world. Some of our friends' replies were golden. Todd Furman hit us up and said, my perfect college football season includes me winning 96% of my bets. The other 4% are losers. Just, you got to account for the inevitable bad beat. Think about, this is a real man right here. This is someone who has broken a spirit a time or two betting this sport. In his perfect world, he doesn't even hit 100%. He's got to have those bad beats just so he can feel alive. That's a real one. Gil Kid said, an electric Heisman race. All Power 5 conferences have 3 or 4 teams in the mix in November. So we go back to the November theme. An all-time classic game at some point in the season, like Tennessee, Bama, or Ohio State, Michigan last year or 2 years ago. This one right here, I think, was one of the best replies. For a singular season, we need chaos across the entire sport. That's what made 07 so much fun. Anything could and did happen every single Saturday. It felt like the college football gods were laughing at the rankings. That right there, I know we go back to 07 a lot. That perfectly encapsulates 07. People were so shell-shocked. Not Saturday night. They woke up on Saturday morning just mortified, terrified at what could happen because there was no convention. Nothing made sense. Your rankings didn't matter. Point spreads didn't matter. We had 3 touchdown dogs winning outright week after week after week. I gave you the stat a little while ago. I didn't make that stat up, by the way. I think it was 7 of the last 9 weeks of the regular season, the number 2 team lost. There was some crazy stat about how often unranked teams beat top 5 teams. Wild. And so a lot of you love that, and some people say that couldn't happen again. Look, they say Vesuvius couldn't erupt like it did once upon a time again. Now, once upon a Saturday, anything could happen. What about Gresham? He said regionality comes back into the sport. That would be perfect for me. It solves the whole fake rivalry problem that I saw in the comments. He's so right about that. This is obviously not something we can snap our fingers and get. Our buddy, enemy to some, but friend to us, Big Game Boomer, put out a list on Twitter the other day about how he would love to just realign the sport and how he would bring different conferences back. Like anytime you talk about bringing the Southwest Conference back, I'm all ears. And he put that out. And so he had Tulane and Georgia Tech back in the SEC. He had Arkansas, for example, back in the Southwest Conference along with Texas. And it was such a beautiful thing. What was beautiful about it, even though some of you disagreed, was it took us back to an era of civility and regionality. Some that watched the Southwest Conference would argue about the civility portion of it. Maybe civil war, but not civility. But the regionality, that stands. It's what college football is supposed to be about. I know some look forward to watching Rutgers play a conference game in the Rose Bowl. I'm just not necessarily one of them, but that is what it is. A couple of more here. This is probably the most common refrain. It's just worded so perfectly here. CF Budge. What a name. At birth given, no doubt. You got to have the following things, he says, to make a perfect season. You got to have a big bad guy like Georgia. You got to have a feel-good story like Kansas last year. You've got to have a legit rising contender that's fun, i.e. Texas. You got to have some absolute chaos that makes you question everything, TCU. So a lot of that existed last year. You just kind of got to have Texas turn it up a notch, but a lot of that existed last year. Maybe Patrick says either a playoff filled with titanic, dynastic programs or complete chaos. Nothing in between. And then there's this classy response from Alex. I really think he's serious. I would give one of my kidneys if I could see USC beat Oklahoma in the playoff on their way to the national championship. Caleb wins another Heisman. Can you imagine that? Do you imagine if we get to the end of the line and it really is USC and Lincoln Riley versus Oklahoma in a postseason setting? We don't sell these games on pay-per-view. You could sell that one on pay-per-view. You could bill that one. That would be like a Dana White special. That would almost be like a Vince McMahon special. We don't get that very often in college football.